Voters in Kuwait are preparing to cast their ballots in the second parliamentary election in less than a year. Kuwait is the only Gulf state with an elected assembly that has the power to challenge the unelected government. However, disputes between MPs and the cabinet have led to a political deadlock. Aljazeera's Rob Matheson is in Kuwait City. So, Rob, you've been educating me on Kuwaiti politics, and the country has held 3 general elections in just over 2 years. Why is that number so high?
Normally, when we talk about elections in Aljazeera, we're talking about big issues like economies or big industrial projects or social issues. This time, Kuwait has all those problems, but it's not talking about any of them, or at least the parliament and the government aren't, because they have been essentially deadlocked for the past 2.5 years. Now, there are a couple of reasons for that, and it's mainly to do with the structure of the parliament itself. The parliament has a tremendous amount of authority because of the 1962 constitution of Kuwait, which is very unusual in the Gulf. It's a very unusual state for any parliament in the Gulf to have quite as much power as this one does in Kuwait. The second thing is that there are 50 seats out of these 65 seats in the parliament which are essentially up for grabs. They're electable seats, which means that candidates can go through campaigns in order to get voted into those seats. But there are no political parties, which means you've got a parliament with 50 people, all independents, all with their own opinions, all determined to do their own right by their constituents, but who are also determined to make their position work for them. Essentially, that has meant everything has ground to a halt. As far as Kuwaitis are concerned, it's a little bit like Kuwait on a Monday night. There's a lot of bluster and hot air, but actually you get very little out of it. And Kuwaitis are getting very, very tired of continually having their parliaments dissolved and more elections. And we're going to be covering those elections, which are happening on Tuesday here in Kuwait. But we've been finding out a little bit more about all of this. For the second time in 11 months, voters in Kuwait are hoping to break the deadlock which has paralyzed their government for more than 2 years. Analysts say one of the challenges is that there are no political parties and candidates run as independents.
Kuwait almost had its official constitution for 70 years. Women had the right to vote almost 18 years. But we still don't have any political parties. We are relying heavily on individuals who we think are good enough to represent us. There is not enough focus on teamwork.
Voters choose 50 of the 65 seats in Parliament. The Emir appoints up to 16 cabinet members, 15 of whom have seats in the National Assembly. Since 2020, the Assembly has been increasingly dominated by members opposed to the government. To try to break the impasse, in 2022, the Crown Prince issued a royal decree to dissolve Parliament, and Kuwaitis went back to the ballot box in September. But 6 months later, the Constitutional Court ruled that decree invalid, saying it went against the 1962 Constitution, which gives significant power to Parliament. The court ordered the National Assembly be dissolved and replaced by the one elected in 2020. Then, in April, Crown Prince Meshal Sabah announced Parliament would be disbanded for a second time, sending Kuwaitis back to the polls.
There is a feeling of lack of interest. Even many politicians running for elections decided not to have permanent campaign headquarters. We have to also realize what saves our democracy is for us to practice our democracy.
On the streets, there's little sign of active campaigning. Kuwaitis have told us that they're no longer interested in politics, or that they just don't feel that it's going to be relevance for them anymore. But some have been saying that they're very concerned that unless the National Assembly can get some sort of consensus, then Kuwait's politics will continue to be deadlocked and Parliament could be dissolved once again. Kuwaitis say politicians need to start talking about the future of their country, but they're not holding out much hope. Rob Matheson, Aljazeera, Kuwait City. What we're going to be watching tomorrow when we're covering the elections for Al Jazeera here in Kuwait on Tuesday is going to be the turnout. There are 793,000 registered voters out of a population of 1 million. Local media is speculating there may be between 50 and 60% of a turnout, which gives an indication of just how disinterested people have become in these elections. Interestingly, candidates too are also becoming more disinterested. Last year, 307 candidates for 50 places in September in those elections. This year, 207 for those 50 places.
Rob, you will be heading our coverage of Kuwait's election tomorrow on Tuesday. Separately, I enjoyed your earlier analogy between Kuwaiti politics and the weather, so keep them coming. Thank you, Rob.